Welcome to the Autosportradio.com 2023 show. I'm your host, Don Kay, and we are coming to you from the Green Street Pub and Eatery at 911 North Green Street in Brownsburg. The program is being brought to you by the Indy Dental Group. If you need any kind of dental work or are interested in getting checked to see how your dental is doing, you've got to check out the Indy Dental Group. Dr. Jack Miller, 500 veteran, and his wife, Dr. Liz Lewis, have a spectacular practice. You call them, make an appointment. They have 5 offices. They'll find a place for you. Their number is 317-846-6125. That's the Indy Dental Group. You need insurance, or you want to check the prices you're paying for your current insurance, I highly recommend call VP Insurance. They've helped us immensely. Mike Pardee and Tom can take care of you, handle you, get you hooked up. Give them a call, find out what they can do for you. Their number is 317-248-0070. They're located at 5004 West 16th Street, just about a mile or less from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. SVRA, they have the Trans Am Series up and running almost better than ever. Great car count. They have the Indy vintage cars. They've got everything. They also have a F5 and F4 being run by Scott Goodyear. They're a spectacular organization. If you check their website, svra.com, and look at their schedule, if there's a race that you can get to in an hour or less, I highly recommend go see it. It's a phenomenal show. You'll love it. My first guest is a gentleman that I've admired his work. I've read his work. I've laughed at some of the stuff he's written. It's funny. It's good. I saw, when looking into his writing career, between the articles and the columns and the books he's written, he's used over more than 4.5 million words. I probably talked that much in 3 days, but if you haven't read one of their books, you're making a huge mistake. You've seen him on television. He's been involved in the sport for many, 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 many years. And I'm going to find out what came first, the chicken or the egg. Please welcome Mr. Dave Argerbright. The first question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg, the writing or the broadcasting?
Yeah, very definitely the writing. I'd been writing for probably 18 years before I really earnestly got into television. I had a little bit here and there, but it wasn't until 2000 with TNN that I really began to work, a lot in television. But before that, it was just sort of a now and then thing.
Is there anything that you didn't get to broadcast that you wish you had?
Oh gosh, I'm sure, yes. But not really. I mean, it'd be kind of fun to maybe work a Formula One race once, but yeah, that's all right. I got to do some NASCAR and definitely some IndyCar racing, lots of stock car and sprint car, and so, I really don't lack for anything that I wanted to do. I'm a short track guy at heart. That's just where I came from and what I still love the most. And I got to do, almost every major short track event, the Knoxville Nationals, the races at Eldora, the Little 500, just lots of key races like that, and I'm proud of that.
And you were, of course, broadcasting the night that Jack Hewitt won all 3 events?
I was just covering the race for Speed Sport. It was actually 4 events.
4, that's right.
And I remember distinctly that night. The year before, he had almost won 3 or something like that. And I remember his father had just passed away like a couple of weeks before, and he really wanted to win that Silver Crown race. And he was behind Darlin, tried everything he could to win, but he just fell short. And that I remember almost as much as the 4, because I knew how much he wanted to win that one. But after he won that first one that night, and then he won the second one, now you're starting to think, I guess it's possible. And then the third one, and by that time everybody in the place was totally on point, watching him, because this, it was impossible then, and I still look back and think that it's impossible, but he did it. Nobody else ever has.
I was there the night that he did it, went up when he did the interviews up in that booth that was up underneath the overhang. Talked to him, and it's amazing the number of people that said, "Oh, I was there." If all the people that said I was there, there had to be 200,000 there.
It's like Woodstock.
Yeah. When you start a book, now I've got to say, I think one of the first ones I read of yours back 25 years ago or whatever it was Hewitt's Law. And I'm sitting reading, I couldn't put the book, usually when I start a book, a novel or something, by the second chapter I read, I wake myself up when the book hits the floor. I fall asleep, but I read this, and Sharon said, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "You won't believe what this book is about." It was fabulous, and of course Jack, he's a one of a kind anyway, so to write about him and what he says was phenomenal.
Well, you know, I do get tons of, and have gotten lots of great feedback from that book, but I've got to be honest with you, a guy like Jack, for a writer, you just need to get out of the way and let him tell his story and help him a little bit here and there, but you know, he's just truly is a one of a kind. And just going over to spend time with he and Jody when we got to do that book, that was a great experience. Just, he's one of my best friends, and you know, he's truly unique, and as time goes on, it means more to me now than even it did at the time. But really, all the guys I got to partner with, I'm privileged that they chose to work with me.
And I think, was it Tuesday is the Jack Hewitt Classic?
Yeah, it's this coming week at Waynesfield, Ohio, and I talked to him earlier this week. He's all fired up. He and Jody and some people got busy and canvassed a bunch of businesses and stuff and got some lap money for the racers. And they're very excited. They're trying to make it a bigger event, and it's good for him. I mean, it's a great guy to honor, and he still wants to be a part of it. It's really good.
It's a shame, because if he was physically able, he'd still be in the car, I'm sure.
Absolutely, no question. You know, the only way that, you know, it finally just where he couldn't do it anymore, or he'd have done it till the end. You know,
no question. The other book that I found very fascinating, I've read 4 or 5 or 6 of your books, but the one I found interesting is when you took your life in your hands and went out with Chris Economaki to write the book with him. And when he was taking you around to show you various areas, if I remember, I said in the book, if it was a one-way street, he wanted to go the other way. He didn't care.
Yeah, Chris was obviously a giant in media and for generations. But man, he was the worst driver in the history of traffic. You know, it was a combination of, you know, New Jersey and Chris's personality, and he just, you know, wanted to do it his way. And we went out to dinner one night there in New Jersey, and when we got finished with dinner, he had a little Audi A4, and we got in his car and started out. And as we came out of the parking lot, it's a one-way, like an up ramp with a guardrail in the middle. Well, he wanted to go to the left to get back down to this highway instead of going up and doing a turn, and he stopped and looked a little bit. I mean, it's busy. There's cars everywhere. It's not a quiet time, you know? And I said, "Chris, that's one way." He goes, "I don't want to go that way." And he just turned left against traffic on this ramp, horns blaring, and we got down to the intersection, and he brought the entire intersection to a standstill. And he just put his flicker on, and off we go to the right, and mission accomplished, you know? So it was an adventure.
Well, you know, how long does it take when you get an idea, or you get somebody that calls you, like we're going to talk about your new book that just came out in January, but when you get with somebody you want to write a book, how long does it take you to sit down and go through the history of who you're writing about?
Well, it depends. There's a lot of potential interruptions to the process, like with Jimmy, the newest book. That took several years. Probably we worked on it, not nonstop, but off and on for about 3 to 4 years. And you know, if you can just stay with somebody and he's got that time he can spare, you can get one in, you know, less than a year. But it's a significant undertaking to write a book, and that's why, Don, there are tons of writers, but only a few authors. It's just a daunting task to stay with it. Once you do your first one and realize you can do it, that helps a lot. But before you get that first one done, it's just so easy to give up and quit because it's so difficult to push it all the way through to the finish.
All right, so I insulted you. You're an
Oh,
author.
no.
You're an
No,
author,
no,
you're
it's,
a writer.
but no, I understand why, you know, and I try to encourage people, you know, just if people come to me and say, you know, I want to write a book, and I just am honest and say, it's doable, you can do it, but you gotta understand in your head, I'm gonna do it, you know, because you'll get bogged down, you don't feel like you're making any progress, and you give up.
Well, you don't give up. You know, I have been watching, and I don't know who these people are that I'm going to probably insult to some degree, but when I watch some of the races on Mayo TV, I miss hearing you broadcasting the event and doing the interviews. Because what I find is a lot of interviewers ask Tom, Dick, and Harry the same question. How is it? How's the track? Well, he just told you one. You have a way of asking interesting questions to get more out of the driver.
Well, it takes a while to get there, and a couple of my mentors, one was Chris, the other was Dave Despain. I felt like Dave was probably the pinnacle of what a motorsports pit reporter would be. He would always do his homework, he was always professional, he put just enough of his personality into it without making it about him, but yet he just was the best as far as I'm concerned. So I tried to emulate those two guys, and Chris would, if he ever saw me do an interview on television early in my days, and I would say something like, you know, how about that racetrack, or something where I didn't specifically ask a question, man, I heard about it. You know, and he would say, Dave, don't do that. You ask a question. That's your job, you know. And he's right, you know. But it is hard, Don, to come up with fresh questions with people, especially if it's somebody that wins a lot and you're interviewing them a lot. It's not easy to come up with fresh stuff. There's lots of times, you know, I'm in the infield of a race and the laps are clicking down and somebody's in the lead, and I'm working through my mind, what am I going to ask him? And maybe it's somebody that I think, boy, this is going to be a killer question, you know, because I know what happened last week, and man, this is going to be a great interview. And then he has a flat tire. And so, well, never mind, who's next? I got to think of a question, you know, so it's hard to be fresh.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me about how you do it. I think you learned early on that you can publish your own books, so that when you publish them, if somebody wants to buy 5, they could call you up and say, they bring me 5 books, you got them. I have a friend who wrote a book, and I said, send me one. I don't have one. Why not? Well, somebody else published it, and it's up to them. Mistake, because I said, I know a guy that does it. He'll tell you how. He never called you.
Well, the thing for me when I wrote my first book in '99 with Brad Doty is that I had a corporate job for many years in sales, and I left that to do media full time, and I still had small kids at home, and you know, as they say, trying to put beans on the table. And I was trying to think of different things I could do in addition to magazine articles to make money. This is before I really had a steady television gig. And so a couple of people said, you know, you could consider a book. And when I looked into it and looked through the traditional publisher route, unless you're Stephen King and sell oodles of books, the percentage that you get is really slim.
Right.
And I felt like I could roll the dice, and even though it was at my own risk, you know, to publish the book, and I would at least get more of the revenue. And that worked for Brad Doty's book that first time, and I'm just hard-headed enough that that's what I want to do, and partly for the revenue reasons, but also, you know, I'm fairly independent. Lisa would probably agree, but you know, I like being in control of all the elements, and I don't want a publisher saying, you need to cut 20,000 words off of that book. No, I don't want to cut 20,000. That's the story, and that's what we want to publish. When you self-publish, you can control those things.
Now, 2 things quick. Our other guest recovered from his accident.
It's the late Mike
here.
Lewis.
I am very pleased to have this gentleman join us.
Great to see you.
I
Likewise.
first met him, I think, about the same time Dave did. Put it back.
This
Yeah,
one.
just leave it on the glass. Just talk towards the glass.
I should have told you.
Back away from the table, sir.
You're okay. It's good. All you need to do is talk in the vicinity of the glass.
Yeah, it'll pick it up. If it turn it around, so it aims at you.
Now we're good.
All right, that'll work. Joining us now is a gentleman that Dave and I both met when he was the general manager at IRP. He went on from there, and I don't know the exact order, but he was the director, I think, of a pro organization, which is Professional Racers Organization, and NHRA that worked the drivers, the team owners, and NHRA to make things good and competitive and so on and so forth. He worked for, had several executive positions with NHRA. He, for quite a number of years, has been senior vice president at Don Schumacher Racing. I had heard he retired, but I don't think that's completely true. And in 2019, Mike was inducted into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. Please welcome Mr. Mike Lewis.
Thank you.
Did I miss half of it? I probably missed half of it.
I think you got the gist of it.
I was gonna say, it's nice and safe to run a top alcohol dragster, but driving an Avon, not so much.
Apparently not. When the traffic lights are out and somebody's not paying attention, you get hit from behind.
Yeah, bummer.
Bummer. Minor inconvenience.
Yeah, well, you made it. That's what counts. And I appreciate you taking the time to limp in here. I want to finish a quick question with Dave, two of them actually. One is a magazine that you wrote for, and you had an idea to start a series, and you didn't know if it'd work. And some people said, yeah, do it, and you started it, and it was huge. In fact, from what I've told, the magazine sold more of them when you started that than they would have normally anyway. Unfortunately, it went away. Have you thought about trying to resurrect something with another, perhaps, publication, or do one online?
Well, there's times when it enters my mind. You know, it's funny, that character that I created, Jimmy Wilson, he ran for about 15 years, 180 episodes, I think, 180 consecutive monthly episodes. And believe it or not, I still sometimes in my dreams when I sleep at night, Jimmy is there and he's in some predicament, you know, and so he's still there. But yeah, sometimes, but it's hard to describe, but that got to be a grind sometimes, to be fresh with 5,000 words this month and take him someplace that he hasn't been before and get him into a predicament and get him out, you know, so we're ready for next month. It's hard. And so there were times where I, you know, really was pounding my head against the desk trying to come up with something. So I don't know. There's times I think about it, but not really.
Mike,
If you put a Jimmy Wilson t-shirt out, I'd buy it. I've read all of them.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was great fun. You know, when Doug Auld, he had the magazine, and you know, this was in '05 or something. I think I've told you this story before, but I had always been curious if I could write fiction. I think every writer wonders what else they could do. It's like a racer a drag racer looks at a sprint car and thinks, I wonder if I could do that, you know? I'd kind of like to try that, you know? Well, that was my try that. And so I thought about it for a long time, and I casually brought it up with Doug on one of our phone calls, and the editor, and told him about it, and he said, I think that'd be great, you know? I said, well, I don't know if I could do it, you know, but I do think it'd be fun. Well, 2 or 3 weeks passed, and we're on the phone again. He said, how you coming with your story? And I said, what story? He said, well, we got to get this thing going. I want to do this. He said, this would make our magazine different than anybody else's magazine. I want to try this. So I took a stab at it, and I stumbled and bumbled. When I looked at those first couple chapters, I'm a little red-faced because I just made basic structural mistakes in the story, but I just didn't know. And then after you do a couple, you start to get the flow of it. And but we never dreamed. Doug said, you know, I said, okay, if I'm going to write this, you got to at least commit to 12 episodes so that whatever story we start, we can finish it properly. I don't want to do 2 or 3 and then leave people hanging that do want to read it. Okay, I promise we'll run 12. So we get down toward the 12, and I said, you know, what do you think? And he said, you can't stop.
Don't stop now.
You know, because I thought even, well, let's stop Jimmy and then invent a new character. He goes, oh no, you can't do that, you know. So it really was just great fun. It was a grind at times, but it was one of the most enjoyable things I ever have done.
For sure, enjoyable to read. I told you before, I read the first book in a hot tub in Key West. I read the last book coming out of ICU last summer, and it got me back on my feet. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. Yeah. You know, when it started, it wasn't quite like social media and things is today where your feedback is immediate. You know, it took took a few months after it started, and a few people, in fact, over the course of it, many people said to me, you know what? When I first saw that, I thought, that's ridiculous. There's no way fiction should be in a racing magazine, period. So they said, I didn't read it for the first year. And then one day I thought, oh, what the hell? And I started reading it, and I went back and read all of them to catch up, you know? And now I like it and I follow it. So a lot of people had that experience, but we didn't really know for sure, but we had done this 3 or 4 months and went to the Chili Bowl. And I was at the Chili Bowl, and I'm walking along the midway there, and a big dude, about a foot bigger than me in every direction, is coming toward me. He's got this biker vest on, and he's bald head and a big earring, you know, and tats, and, you know, big dude. And he's kind of glaring at me as he's walking my way, and I'm thinking, okay, what's this guy's story, you know? And so he gets up a little closer, and he kind of stops. He goes, are you Dave? And I said, yeah, that's me. He says, you write that story? Yeah, that's me. And he kind of nodded, and then he looked around, and then he leaned over really close, and he said, hey, is Jimmy going to get hooked up with Renee, or what's going to happen? And that's when, right then, I thought, we may be onto something here. This is okay.
You're onto something.
Yeah.
Let me just throw out a name. You're saying, where would I go? Racer magazine.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I think Jimmy would have to adapt to Indy cars if you took him to Racer magazine. That's how we finished it, though. When the last episode,
right.
Jimmy got a ride in Indy car, and that was the last chapter.
That's
so
right.
You never know.
Talk to Paul. He's always looking for more sales, and they certainly helped the magazine you wrote for. Mike, you're here. I got the impression that you retired. Now, what your comment the other day when you texted me and said that one of the new owners of the Don Schumacher Racing had passed away, and you said something about weaves, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, maybe he's there helping out in the transition. I don't know. Are you?
No, I went to work for the Maynard family when Joe and Kathy bought the last of the Don Schumacher teams. I went to work with them. We're still in the DSR building,
Yeah.
Same office I've been in since '05. So it feels like home every morning when I walk in. Joe lost his wife Kathy, and Kat had struggled with MS for 35 years. Both career soldiers. She was told in 1989 that she might have 15 good years. She made it 35. And up until the last moment, she had this incredible wit, this incredible heart. They worked very hard so they could support charities. Austin P University, for one, A Soldier's Child. They work with Gary Sinise Foundation. But she saw Tony Schumacher at Bristol, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, when Tony was still driving the Army car. And she said, I want one. So they got one. And they started as an associate sponsor with Leah Pruitt, and then brought Tony back last year as a sponsor, but all along wanted equity. They wanted to build something. So they bought the team end of July last year, and have since partnered with Tim Wilkerson and Justin Ashley, but it's a very different growth pattern than Don Schumacher, who owned everything, put it all under one roof, and pretty much controlled everything. In this case, we've got 3 different teams working out of 3 different buildings, 3 different crew chiefs, and from a technology standpoint, I guess if one of the teams needs help, it's available, but generally we race each other heads up. And Joe centralized the management, the financing, payroll, marketing, all of those things are now centralized in Clarksville, Tennessee. So the teams are based up here. Joe does business, his partner Eric Lehman in Tennessee. So that's kind of the structure of JCM Racing.
So it's interesting when you think about it. Some of the drivers, Antron Brown drove for him, he's got his own team. Ron Capps drove for him, he's got his own team. Leah Pritchett drove for him, she drove for him, but now she's with Tony, and they have their own team. Who have they got in those buildings? Who's driving for them now?
Tenants, it's all tenants. There are no DSR teams at this time. I don't know that there would not be at some point in the future, but there are 4 teams in the building. Paul Lee is in the building as well. Don's building a new race shop. The intent is for us to move into the new shop behind the main building so they can continue expanding manufacturing. They're doing a lot of defense work, aerospace work, in addition to motorsport. But they're also making some really cool Gen 3 Hemis that can fit in any vehicle that Dodge makes with a Hemi. They'll make an engine that makes 1,150 horsepower, and they've got one that makes 1,500 that'll bolt in and match up with factory wiring harnesses. So it's a lot of exciting things going on at DSR, but it's a different world.
All right, let's go back to your world. You got involved. I mean, you look like some guy that should have been playing basketball or soccer or something, but your family owned Maple Grove Speedway, and you've been involved in motorsports, and obviously it hooked you. Like, I came to the '64 Indianapolis 500, and they can't throw me out of town. I'm
Right.
still here. What attracted you to want to put 50 or 60 years of your life in motorsport?
I grew up around the Reading Fairgrounds and watched dirt track racing, flathead modifieds, then V8 modifieds. And my grandfather built Maple Grove Raceway, and I heard my first nitro car, and that's what hooked me.
It's a religious experience.
It truly was for
I mean,
me.
It is. It is.
Yep, so all these years later, I haven't raced anything that doesn't run on nitro. Not that I wouldn't, but it's just kind of the way it seems to have worked out. But that's where it started.
You know, the thing that I like about motorsports, you read, or you hear stories, or you see stories about the other professional program of sports. And they've got guys and gals, I guess, that do things you guys think, you're making $50 million. What the hell are you doing? In motorsports, you don't have that. I only know in my time that I was around IndyCar, I only know of 2 guys that got themselves in trouble. Other than that, of the hundreds that are involved, there's only 2 that I know of. It's a clean sport, and the driver is like the quarterback of the team. He gets all the credit, but he doesn't do, other than pack or shoot, doesn't do a whole lot of work. And the teams are dedicated, and the hours and hours and hours that are spent, people don't realize. When I first came here in '64, I thought they backed the car off the truck, put it on the track, and went out and what? No. There's hours and hours and hours of work. And you know, first off, you have to have confidence that if I give this kid or guy or gal a car, they can win with it. But I got to give them a car they can win with. And the dedication is just phenomenal. It's like nothing I've ever seen in any sport. I don't care what it is.
All motorsports is a team sport, and any member of that team can cost the team a victory.
Oh yeah.
The driver can only do so much with the equipment around him or her. The driver can cost the team a victory, just like the tire guy or the guy who builds the short blocks or does the superchargers. It's a total team sport, and when the team functions well, and I don't do a lot of driving, but in my experience, there's nothing like having confidence in the people around you. When you start the engine and stage the car, you feel invincible.
Yeah, then to make sure, the thing you got to make sure is when you leave, you don't catch out of the corner or a red light.
I've been there.
Going from Maple Grove and your career moving forward, I met you at IRP. I'm sure you spent a number of years doing other things before you got here. What'd you do?
Well, I left Maple Grove to work for NHRA and spent 6 years in California. And when I came to IRP, that was a transfer within the NHRA organization.
Is that Pomona?
I worked out of Glendora, And my job involved overseeing Pomona, Bakersfield, Gainesville, Atlanta, Baton Rouge, plus all the division offices, the youth program, and a lot of other activities with NHRA. And then coming to Indy, for me, was coming to a much more comfortable culture, being around people like everyone in this room, that we talk the same language, you know. Indy just felt comfortable. And the challenge of working at that time with USAC, with NASCAR, being close to the 500, and having the biggest Chevy event, the biggest Mopar event, and the biggest drag race in the world was a pretty exciting challenge.
Yeah, I'll jump in if you don't mind. What years, I'm trying to place what years you were at IRP?
I came here in the summer of '95
Okay.
and managed the track through the summer of '98.
So I think Bob retired, I'm gonna say 88, 89,
And then
90,
Lex
right?
Dudas
Then
took
Lex
us.
was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and IRP at that time was, man, it was a happening place.
It was
There
Mecca.
was a lot going on.
It was Mecca. It was to some extent, it's kind of coming back.
Yeah, it is. I think
Yeah.
Casey's
Yeah, I
doing a
think
hell
they're
of a job.
trying. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
trying.
He really is.
If I can share a fast story at IRP, about 92, I think, two or three, as part of the Nationals, they arranged a bunch of us media people to come over and participate in basically heads-up drag races. They were like rental cars, Oldsmobile, Alivas or Achievas, something like
Achievas,
that.
yeah.
Little, like a compact car.
Yeah.
It was a blast, and I finished second. I don't remember who beat me, but we had eliminations. It was great.
Yeah.
But you know what? I remember, Mike, Wally Parks was still alive then.
Yep.
You know, the guy that founded NHRA. And he was an older gentleman at that time.
Yeah.
But as we were milling around the cars and getting in the cars and doing our deal, Wally had this little camera, little digital type camera, and he was going around taking everybody's picture. And I remember being struck, saying, Wally Parks is taking our picture? You gotta be kidding me.
That was
because
Wally Parks.
Wally Parks was Wally Parks.
That was
you know?
Wally Parks.
But IRP was a great deal then. It really was.
We did an event like that at a track operators function. I was still working for Maple Grove, and it was in Orange County in California. It was a really foggy night, to the point where they called off their regular event and they let us try to run. And I mean, from half track, you couldn't see the finish line. And so I'm in a rental car, and I've got the handicap lead, and Wally had a Torino that was pretty fast. So I'm backing out of it. I'm a little nervous because I can't really see where I'm going. And here comes this Torino by me at 90 miles an hour, and it was Wally Parks.
All four barrels wide open.
You
Yeah.
bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was no quit in Wally Parks.
Yeah. At that time too, in the '90s, is the what was it then? The Bush series
Right.
came out, and people forget what a big deal that was
Yeah.
for the city of
Yeah.
Indianapolis.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
I hated that going away. I hated it.
I was blessed to be a part of it for a short time, and it was magic.
Special.
Yeah.
But I think Casey's, they're trying to bring that events back.
I think so.
Because they used to draw 45, 50,000 people for the.
Well, it would be a sellout.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They had to put up grandstands and then they
Yep.
sold them out too.
Yeah.
So it's, now, when you left IRP, I think that's when you took over Pro, I believe?
Correct.
Yeah. And that was an organization that worked with NHRA and the drivers and owners.
Correct.
To try and make it competitive so that the fans get their money's worth.
We kept each other honest,
Yeah.
but we got along.
Yeah. How did you go to Don Schumacher? How did that happen?
The night that I left IRP, the same day that I left IRP, my phone rang, and it was Don Schumacher, just saying, I'm starting a new team. I'd like you to come to work for me. Jeez. I wasn't ready to make a commitment. So he was my first consulting contract. And I worked with Tony the first year or two, actually for about a year and a half. No, not even that. And then I went to work for PRO. And at the end of '02, Don kept pestering me, and I finally realized, at that point he was at 3 teams, and growing, had just bought the Chip Ganassi building over on Industrial Boulevard. And I said, okay, Don, let's do it.
And the world was never the same, the team was never the same. Because every time I talked to anybody there, I said, go see Mike, he runs the whole thing. Did you also have to inventory Don's battery chargers and stuff?
No,
Oh.
no.
I think he owned about every one in the world, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, at the time he did.
Yeah.
He sold Schumacher Electric, but at the time he sold it, he was making over 90% of the battery chargers sold in America.
Yeah.
And they didn't necessarily say Schumacher, but he made them.
That was in Chicago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where he was
Correct.
based, yeah.
No prospect.
Is Tony back racing? I mean, a guy who won umpteen U.S. nationals. In fact, I remember in one race, and I can't remember where it was. He was going on a run, and there was one tree in the whole park, and he went over the fence somehow and hit
That
the
was
damn
Memphis.
tree. Yeah, Memphis. The only tree in
Yeah.
the whole place, and he hit it.
Well, he actually just missed it, but boy, that was
It looked like he
way
collided with
too
something.
close. Yeah, that was probably the ugliest top fuel crash I've ever seen someone survive.
Yeah, he walked away. Ooh.
Yeah.
But is he driving again now?
Yeah, we brought, actually, Kathy Maynard
Yeah.
wanted to bring Tony back, so they did in October of 21 for the 2022 season. So Tony's back. Skag is the sponsor, and they're doing a full 3-year program, and probably the most energetic sponsor I've seen with NHRA in maybe a decade. They're very aggressive in their marketing. They've also sponsored Tim Wilkerson through the Maynard family. So a lot of good things happening. Tony's full-time.
What did he do when he wasn't? Was he running, was he involved in the charger business?
No.
Schumacher Electric?
I don't really know. He moved to Austin, Texas.
Yeah, he went to Texas.
Married Summer Penland, who's now Summer Schumacher.
Yeah.
And her family had been involved in racing for some time, so we'd see Tony periodically, and he did some driving during COVID. We had commitments to run a certain number of races, and the schedule, I think we only ran 11 races in 2021. So we ran Leah's backup car, hired Mike Green, put Tony in it, won the race in Dallas. That was his 85th victory. So he's been back ever since.
I watched the events, but sometimes I get up to answer a phone or something, I miss a run, who's running, but, you know, there's something that just catches you in drag racing. I'm not a big drag racer, I've gone to a lot of events, but there, when you look at the, like 11, 12, 13,000 horsepower, and you go a quarter mile. One of my first questions, when I had John Force on the program one night, I said, you know, you're only you hit the button in 3.5, 4 seconds, you're done. What are you panting for? I said, because you hold your breath. And it's
Yeah.
hell, he said, you'd
Yeah.
be surprised.
Yeah, my guess is it's pretty busy in there.
It's
Yeah.
busy. For a
Yeah.
short time, yeah, the intensity is indescribable.
Who was it? It was the crew chief that built the Budweiser.
Dale Armstrong.
Yeah, I don't know, he was working on some way to build a machine that could tell how many horsepower. I forget what they call it.
We actually,
Dynamometer. Dynamometer.
Yep.
Yeah. Did he ever did it?
what we did with an Austrian company is build a strain gauge that mounted on the drive shaft that actually measured horsepower.
Oh, really?
So on the Army car, and it's almost maybe 8 years ago, we measured a peak of 11,051.
You know, I'll jump in. You know, Jimmy did some drag racing, but it was what we would used to call unauthorized drag racing.
There's
But-
a lot of that on
Yeah.
Discovery on Monday nights now.
Yes, that's right. But you know, I'm a hot rodder early on, you know, at 12, 14 years old when muscle cars ruled the streets and stuff. There is no way anybody from that time could have envisioned, 11,000 horsepower or 11,000 RPMs
Right.
in a V8 motor.
Right.
That's impossible. That's physically impossible. Well, no, it isn't if you work at it long enough.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can get there, and I still continue to be amazed at what's able to be done mechanically in motorsports. Even besides the chutes, just getting stopped from 300 miles an hour.
We've got a lot of advantages that people didn't have 10 years ago. The automatic shutoff system. If a driver doesn't pull the parachutes, it'll pull the parachutes for them at 1,400 feet from the starting line. The 11,000 horsepower that we measured 8 years ago was with fuel pumps that pump maybe 90 gallons a minute. We're up to 110. So
That's more power.
that's a lot more
Yeah.
power, and we haven't run that strain gauge since then. But with all of that, there's limitations. We run a push-rod Hemi. If we had stayed with the overhead cam engine, if NHRA hadn't required the 4 3/4 inch bore centers and all of the specs that are in the current engine, the supercharger limitations, I mean,
Who knows?
who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's
But they've done a
phenomenal.
good job in kind of maintaining a level playing field so that our speeds have gone up a little bit, but what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years, the lead cars aren't running much faster, but the 8th and 10th and 12th qualifiers are much closer to the lead cars than they used to be, and that's good for the fans.
Yeah, I've noticed watching the times, I look up the times, and it's like IndyCar from 1 to 33, a second and a half, and it covers
Yeah.
the field. I mean, they're within hundreds
Yeah.
of a second, and you're in 10th
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
You've seen every corner of this thing, especially in drag racing, and this is something racers don't like to talk about, or they don't like, and a lot of fans don't either, these limitations and so on. But when you're running a team, DSR or whatever, a top level team like that, there's a line item in there somewhere for development, and that line item can't get too big. And that's what happens if it's unlimited, because if he are all spending, if they're spending $2 million a year developing, you either spend it or you fall behind.
Every team has 10 sets of cylinder heads. That's 20 heads. We used to run 7 teams at DSR. That would be 140 cylinder heads. So when Alan Johnson came up with a better cylinder head, that's 140 cylinder heads that would go on the market at 50 cents on the dollar, and you would upgrade your equipment. That doesn't happen anymore because we're not allowed to change the cylinder head design. So it stabilizes things. After we've run a cylinder head for a period of time, or maybe put a gasket out and had to make repairs, that's a cylinder head we can sell to a smaller team and help keep them going. But the new cylinder head isn't going to work any better than the ones we ran last year. The biggest advantages are just the tuning, just making the parts work better. We may change cam profiles a little bit. We've changed the clutch profiles a little bit. It's just learning how to work with the equipment. And our equipment is pretty much the same as everybody else's equipment. It's like an IndyCar. The only difference between NHRA and IndyCar is that we can still make our own cars. We can make our own parts, they just have to follow the spec. So it's very close, very competitive, and when a team dominates, it's only because they are a little bit more consistent, and a driver right now, Justin Ashley, is the driver that has the best reaction times. So he can be within 100th or 2 of anybody out there and still turn on the win light consistently. So that's where everybody in the team has to be performing at an A+ level.
I have one more question for him. I'm jumping right in here.
all right.
I got an email today from NHRA about one of the recent events had a big audience, the TV audience.
Yeah.
And I guess the NHRA is doing okay.
We've had audiences of over 2 million. Of course, a NASCAR lead-in doesn't hurt, but we've had more. I'm not sure how many events are on Fox, on the main Fox network, but we're on good time slots with great promotion, some good lead-ins. And I think, the cast of drivers out there has never been better. Tony Stewart has brought a lot of new energy to NHRA from people that are involved in motorsports that are really paying attention. And he's been fun to work with and always has been.
He's having fun. You can
Oh.
see it, and I think it's great.
How about Wednesday night? Wednesday
Yeah,
during the day,
He and Nelson.
they both won.
Yeah, I saw a picture of, he was knelt down next to Nelson's Legends car. Did you see that?
I saw that picture.
It was great.
Talked to Nelson earlier that day because Tony was making his first runs. Of course, I don't think they've announced this, but he made his first runs in Matt Hagan's funny car on Wednesday. Or Tuesday? Tuesday.
So he was fired up.
And then they went down and both won in
Yeah.
Columbus.
Yeah, that's really cool. Those two guys, and I'd say this if they were both sitting right there.
Yeah.
They've had their moments,
Oh,
as
yeah.
father and son.
Oh, yeah.
But they are there for each other.
They really
and
are.
I know that must have been a great night.
Yeah,
They
that
both
was fun
won.
to see.
Yeah.
What, didn't Schumacher, the one team that I remember hearing, made most of your own parts? Majority of all.
At
all your parts.
DSR?
Yeah.
I think DSR, John Force, I think both teams, we built the chassis in-house, machined the engine blocks, cylinder heads, connecting rods, pulleys and brackets, the entire clutch assembly. It's all, excuse me, it's all made in-house. And most of those parts are available to other teams. So especially now that Don's not running a DSR team, he's still making parts for our teams and for a lot of other teams. But yeah,
The thing that's always interested me, and again, I had John Force on the program one night, and what I should have done is ask him a question, go sit down.
yeah,
Just off he goes.
yeah,
And to me, it's like when I was working in Florida before I came back here to chase race cars again. I'd say, where'd you come from? What are you doing? And I told him I was on a race team and I did. Oh, you know AJ Foyt? Oh, yeah. And I sold business with that. It's like now you go to drag racing. Who's the number one guy that gets attention? John Force. And when you think about it, before he really started, he had to borrow money sometimes just to get home.
yeah, he did.
I'll look at him.
Yeah, he did.
And I gotta think there's guys, I told him this when I had him on the show, I said, there's gotta be somebody watching television. I know that SOB, he borrowed money from me. And he said, probably.
I've known John since the days that he started and couldn't get to the finish line without catching fire. But I bumped into him at the parking lot at the SEMA show one year, and I just barely knew him, but he was hustling, and he had on a corduroy leisure suit
Oh, geez.
with a brown shirt with a collar that looked like Elvis, and he had the gift of gab.
Oh.
He knew where he wanted to go the entire time, and it just took him a long time to hire Austin Coyle, who gave him a car that he could drive and win, and kept him out of trouble. And Austin would talk to him like a father and just tell him, John, sit down, or John, shut up. But John won a lot of races. Austin still pays attention to it, although he's retired. But I've never forgotten the John Force I met that day. And I could tell John Force stories all night. He's an amazing representative of our sport,
Huge.
a character larger than life.
Oh,
And we thought he'd retire when he turned 60. That's 14 years ago. and he's still running 335 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean, he's not just still, he's racing at top
He's
level.
racing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and competitive, yeah.
Yeah.
If I can indulge a quick John Force story, the early, probably the late 80s, NHRA had a couple of guys back in the 80s, Steve Earwood and
Yeah.
Jim Densmore was a...
Dave Densmore.
Or Dave Densmore,
Yep,
yes,
yep.
thank you. He was Kenny Bernstein's PR guy for a
Yep.
while and different things, and I don't remember if he worked with John or, I don't remember, but anyway, I had started writing my speed sport column, and either Steve or Dave had called me when the Nationals were here, saying, hey, are you coming to the Nationals? And, wanting me to write about drag racing, which I didn't write a lot about it, but I enjoyed a little bit. So I came down and I decided, introduced me to John, or I don't remember how, but I was gonna write a column, just sort of hang in the background and watch Force operate, so they got ready, this was like on Saturday or whatever, and they're getting ready for their next round, and he and his crew, they pushed the car over, and I'm just sort of hovering in the background, just making sure I'm staying out of the way, and because I'm just observing, and they pushed him. He is 10 minutes from bolting into the car, and he sees me and says, is there anything I can help you with? I mean, are you... No, man, you do what you're doing. I'm just trying to stay out of your way. I've always really admired that,
Yeah.
Because he wasn't saying, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Beat it.
Yeah.
He was genuinely, like, he was a born PR guy, and he didn't want, if he could get some PR from this guy standing back here, he wanted to do it.
Yeah.
I've never forgotten that.
No, that's John.
He's quite a guy, and the thing that always impresses me, when you see him at the racetrack, you think, he's had that suit on for the last month, without question.
You know what? I figured out why. He wears we kid him about putting his fire suit on when he gets out of bed. He comes to the track and puts it on. But I raced a couple of weeks ago, and we had runs that were from, I think my first one was at noon, my last at 9:30, and I kept it on. Because it's so much work to bend over and untie your shoes to take it off. That's why John Force always has his fire suit on.
Yeah.
Dave, I gotta interrupt you a minute.
Oh, no, you're good.
First off, you have books that are available, and you have a place where they can be ordered. And the second thing is, you sent me a couple of links. You now have your own YouTube channel, and you're starting to put programming together, programs. And the first one I think that I saw that you sent me was in 1985. I didn't recognize you. You had a mustache and big curly hair, and your interview was with Rich Vogler. What are you doing? How do you find that? So that's two questions. How do you get your books, and how do you see your videos?
Books are at daveargabright.com.
Well, that's clever.
If you Google Jack Hewitt book, it's the first thing that comes up. Books by Dave Argabright. But the YouTube channel, I'm having a lot of fun with it. Lisa is my executive producer, and she's.
I saw the whip in her hand when I walked in.
You saw it right. And I've just had a lot of fun with it. When I decided to get off the road at the end of 21, I'd done television for a lot of years, and I wasn't sure. I knew I was going to get off the road, and that's been great. That's been exactly the right time to do that. But I still wanted to stay busy and engage with some things, so I started buying a little bit of video equipment as time went on, and a couple tripods and stuff like that, some lights, just at the idea that eventually I would start to do this. So I started with resurrecting some old interviews, this Vogler interview from '86. Boy, that's a long time ago. And but it's been really a lot of fun, and the most fun has been hearing from people that I haven't heard from in a really long time. Hey man, I saw you on YouTube. They'll call me, and it's great. It's just another way to stay engaged, and I'm enjoying it.
So when you go to YouTube and in the search put Dave Argabright?
Yep. I haven't mastered all of that yet. As far as I'm, you know what, Don? I'm very proud of the books I've done, but I still struggle so much with marketing, and I don't like to promote myself. So I'm not very good at that. But I'm trying to get better, and I'm trying to use social media more. You learn things like Facebook and YouTube don't play well together at all. Facebook does not want you on YouTube because you're not on Facebook if you're on YouTube. So if you post your video and say, here's my new video, you, post a little thumbnail, and here's my new video, here's a clip to YouTube, Facebook's algorithm makes sure about 12 people see that. They just bury you. And so I've learned that you have to also put your video up on Facebook if you want people to watch it. I mean, I'm slowly learning to navigate and trying to bridge, and who knows? But I enjoy doing them.
Stay with it. I mean, everything you do is worth seeing and reading and hearing, and
Oh, thank you.
don't
I
hesitate
appreciate
to
that.
promote yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I need to hire you to promote me, and I'm in business, but I'll pitch you on it, but the pay is not great. I will tell you that.
Mike, I gotta ask you, obviously when you got into motorsports, probably the last thing, you probably never even thought about it. International Hall of Fame. What was it like? I think it was Big Daddy that called you to say you had been inducted, or were going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. What was that like? How did that feel to you?
At the 2018 Nationals, we at DSR would do an open house, and we'd raise $100,000 a year for Riley Hospital. So Don Garlitz had his car at IRP, and I just ran into him, and he said, "Do you want my car?" I said, "Well, of course." Then he said, "What time would you like me?" So he came to DSR with his car, did the open house. I ran into him, I think it was Sunday night at Red Lobster of all places, and I bought him dinner. Just told the waitress to give me the check, and we walked out. So that week, maybe Wednesday of that week, I got a call, and I saw his name pop up, and I thought he was calling to say thank you. And instead he said, "You've just been nominated to be in the 2019 Hall of Fame." And from that moment on, I was just blown away. It's been a great honor. Jack Beckman did the introduction. We had 5 tables of people there, and I couldn't have been more touched with the whole experience. And after Jack finished the introduction and I sat down, I hear this voice. Antron kind of invited himself to make comments. And I mean, it was just surreal. So I'm proud of it. I'm in great company. There's probably 1 million people that could have been selected, probably should have been selected, but it was an honor.
It speaks, I mean, I'm not speaking for Dave, but I'm sure Dave would agree with me. Of all the people that I have run around, and I had one of the members of some fairly big job with NHRA accused me of selling my pass, because he saw me parked at the Dairy Queen. I was waiting for somebody who was gonna park there and ride with me in, because I had the pass to get in. He accused me of being there selling that pass. The next year when I applied, he turned me down. So I went over his head and got it back in, and I walked in their little eating thing up in the building, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I got a pass." "How'd you do that?" "None of your business."
I might know who that was,
I bet you do. Yeah, we don't want to mention any names.
and he's not there anymore.
I would guess not, as far as I
Yeah.
know he's not.
Yeah.
But I'm just, to go from being a kid at Maple Grove
Yeah.
to being in the Drag Racing Hall of Fame. Pretty good ride.
Yeah, I've been blessed. I've truly, honestly been blessed. And it all really, it's just all about the people that I've met along the way, and people that have kind of given me a little push here and a little push there and some advice. And if I was smart enough, maybe I'd be paying attention when they were passing along that advice, which didn't happen very often. I wasn't all that attentive growing up, but
But you helped a lot of people, a lot of good things for the series, for NHRA in general, for the teams and the owners and the drivers, so I think it's obviously justified in my opinion.
Well,
Of the
thank
people
you.
that I know, and to say that I could call Hall of Famer and invite him on the program, and he said, yeah. Well, I wanted to schedule him in May, and something else came up, and I got somebody that I didn't expect, so I said, how about next time available? He said, sure, here he is.
And when you told me Dave was gonna be here, I would be happy to sit out here and just be part of the audience.
So when I talked to you in January, you were getting ready to do some racing, and it sounds
I
like you're
did.
doing it.
I
So,
did.
top alcohol, what do you?
Yeah, I licensed in March, first time in 7 years, and ran my first event in May and qualified third out of 18 cars and beat one really good car first round and lost a close second round.
So is it like a bicycle? Was it?
Well, I did it the right way. I went back to Frank Hawley School and started over with the whole 2-day sportsman program before I drove the alcohol dragster. Yeah, it really felt really, really good. But until race day,
I'm sure it did.
until race
Yeah.
day last month, you know, I could drive the car. I mean, I could put numbers on the scoreboard, but I didn't know if I could race it. So to win my first round against a former world champion, that felt really good.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll do a couple more in the fall, and maybe that's it. I mean, it had been 7 years, and a heart issue that sidelined me from being able to race until I got that fixed last summer. So my goal all along was to get back in the car and pick up where I left off and prove I could still do it.
Make sure you let us know when you're gonna race around here. We'll come out and cheer for you.
Gosh, I wish I could. It'll be
Yeah.
in Reading and Charlotte. They had a really cool event with Cletus and cars, and they ran the alcohol dragsters and funny cars, and I'd love to have raced there, but there wasn't a car available, so I didn't get to do that
You
one.
mean Casey couldn't shake the car loose for you?
The good cars.
Yeah, he's not gonna run just any
Well, I
car,
don't
you
blame
know.
him. I wouldn't
It's
either.
gotta be.
I am a little fussy.
It's gotta be a car that can win now,
Let
right?
me ask you, the 8 years you were gone, when you got in this time, how different was the car than the one you drove
Not
8 years?
much.
Really?
I had driven a car similar to it. It was a car that Morgan Lucas had actually raced as a top fuel car, and we're about the same size, so I knew I'd fit. Yeah, it just kind of felt like it was supposed to.
Well, I would think too, this meant something because I remember when we talked on the phone, you really put your mind to it. This
Yeah.
was something you really wanted
Yeah.
to do. So to have that idea, I want to get back in a car, to when you're actually sitting there looking at the lights,
Yeah,
that's pretty
it
good.
felt pretty good.
Yeah.
And being, again, around the people, Tony and Robin Sampson, they live in Marion, not far from here. They've got a really good car, so I feel really comfortable. It's the car that I drove in licensing in March, so we raced it. Unfortunately, that car's not available for a while, so I'll drive one of Randy Meyer's cars in September.
Cool.
Well, I don't know, there's something about motorsports. You know, you can be a football player, but by the time of 35, it's time to get out before while you can still walk and think. But it's amazing how many years a race driver can work and perform competitively, because there's a lot of things you can do besides the physical part of it. You know, you can test and keep your eyesight so you can pick up that light on time.
Yep.
All the things that it takes to drive the cars can be done.
Yeah,
And of course, like Indy cars, most of the drivers go to physical fitness. If you've ever been up to Jim Leo's place and you look at all the boards of all the records for various things, you see who's at the top. Scott Dixon is on the best at almost everything up there.
yeah.
But all the guys you go in there and there's all the drivers, most all of them are there.
Think how different it is, Mike, when we were kids and looking up at who the heroes were. They were smoking cigarettes and they were overweight and it's a whole different thing now.
Our good friend named Dale Funk from Kentucky drove a car called the Kentucky Moonshiner, a top fuel car that was very competitive. And it was fairly typical on a hot summer day. On his last run of the day, he'd put a beer between his legs, make the run, and have a beer on the top end.
Well,
Yeah.
Some of the NASCAR guys used to smoke while they're driving.
Yeah,
Well, Trickle, you
Trickle
know,
was
Dick
always
Trickle
in.
and ASA
Yeah.
and stuff. He had a cigarette lighter
Oh,
in the
yeah.
car,
Oh,
and under
yeah.
caution, he used an open face helmet.
Yeah.
You know, with goggles, and he'd pull out a cigarette and light
Oh,
up. Under caution, flick it out, just as they were coming to the green.
times have changed.
Yeah,
Well, you know, it's interesting when you think about, you know, Kenny Bernstein, when you first wanted to go 300 miles an hour. Now at 300 miles an hour, he wouldn't qualify. If there was
Yeah.
19 cars, he'd be
Yeah.
left, he wouldn't make it.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
amazing
fact.
what's happened. And you gotta think not only the horsepower, but the cars, the design.
Right.
You don't see a lot of changes, but they're there. You
They're
just don't-
there.
you can't see
Tires.
them. Tires. How many runs can a Goodyear rear tire and top fuel car last?
Typically 5 or 6,
Really?
maybe even a little more.
When we do the burnout, because of the water, it doesn't tear them up?
No, it just makes them a little bit warmer. They probably have taken away a little bit of the traction. If part of the goal NHRA's had is to flatline the top speeds. So we've seen a lot of the 330s only because more cars have caught up to the lead cars. Not because the lead cars, other than Brittany Force, who every now and then just is, 338 or 330, whatever. But a lot more cars have caught up. The reason we haven't continued past 340 and 342 and 345, Goodyear's leveled off their tire. They make a really good spec tire that's consistent, that doesn't delaminate, that doesn't come apart. We can count on the tire. They could make a tire that would be faster, and possibly there would be an increased risk to that. So we're risk averse when it comes to going faster.
the naked eye is not gonna tell you the difference between 338 and 330.
That's a
I
fact.
defy anybody.
That's a fact.
to do
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of people at the Speedway say, how fast are you going? 220, that's all? He just went 235. Did you tell the difference? No. Can't tell the
The
difference.
biggest difference is we might go 330, but we don't have to make a left turn in turn one.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, every motorsport is different. And it's fun to have Tony Stewart with us. It's fun to have other people come by and visit. And no drag racer would tell you that they're prepared for turn one at Indy or Monaco or, I mean, it's all different.
And you could take an indie guy who's super accomplished and great at getting into that turn one. You take him to Baja, for
Yeah.
example, and he's
Yeah.
gonna say, now wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's all, or take him to an AMA flat track motorcycle race.
Yeah, oh,
Well, no thanks, you know?
Well, that's what Richard Petty, when Andy Granatelli wanted him to run, he said, if it doesn't have a roof and fenders, I'm not getting it. I'll pay you I heard him, I'll give you $1 million. He said, no thanks. And he said, no,
Yeah.
I won't do it.
we went to the Mint 400. Tony's crew chief, Mike Neff, and his son Chase won whatever the class is right below the trophy truck class. It's a V6 turbocharged instead of the V8, but that's 400 miles in the desert, and they did it. And so, as a fan, it's a long time between laps. So, but it was an amazing experience. And Mike's driven funny cars and off-road trucks, and so, excuse me, he could probably drive anything if he put his mind to it, but that's kind of rare.
Yeah. Different animal, really.
They put
Each-
Travis Pastrana in a top fuel car last year. It just went 300 feet, but he got out and said, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like you said earlier, just the first time you hear a fuel car,
Yep,
you just can't believe the sensory experience of it. You know,
Yeah.
it shakes your internal
It
organs,
really does.
you know, and you can't tell somebody about that. They have to feel
have to
it.
feel it.
Yeah,
And the interesting thing about it is, I've had, you know, people, when's the best time to go to the Nationals? I said, one thing you gotta do is go out there Friday or Saturday night. It's spectacular. What's the difference? Because you'll see what you don't see during the day. It's there, but you just don't see it. And they come out and say, wow, That's really neat. I said, yeah, all the fire and all that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But you just don't see it during the day.
I've never been to the night race out there, and I need to do that. That's a bucket list deal.
Friday night at
Yeah.
Indy is opening
Yeah.
night, and it's probably my favorite qualifying run of the year. Just, I mean, big crowd, opening ceremonies, and it's fun.
Yeah. Hey dear, I think I know a guy that can hook us up with some passes. So I'll work on that.
I'll give you my card.
Well, that's his boss, so that's the way to do
You
it.
got that right. Yeah.
I had a question for you.
Actually, his name is John Force.
Yeah.
Dave, once again, to get your books and to see your videos, where do we go?
DaveArgabright.com. And one thing I've got to do is add a link to the YouTube page at my website, so that if somebody goes there, they can go to both places.
And quickly, I want to mention, this is your new book, The Newport Nightmare, Living the Dream. It just was published in January. It's now available. And tell a little bit about the character that's written by the gentleman that's written about.
Jimmy Owens is from East Tennessee. He's a dirt late model racer, one of the best in the country, multi-time World 100 winner, multi-time Lucas Oil champion. But he's just a true, humble, backwoodsy East Tennessee guy. And I'm really proud of that book. A couple things. Jimmy had a tough upbringing, and he's very honest in talking about his life. It's a fascinating story. But what I really like is, so far, I mean, a lot of my books are sprint car people. And I've had sprint car people that bought the book. I'm blessed with a following of readers. And they call me and say, that might be the best one you've ever done. Or they say, yeah, that Owens guy, I've never really been a late model guy, but I want to watch him race.
Mhm.
You know, he's an interesting guy, so I'm really proud of that book.
You should be proud of all of them. I think they're the ones that I have read, and I certainly haven't read all of them yet. But, you know, in my position, or our position, or she just left, my week is 6 Saturdays and 1 Sunday. So, and what
Yeah.
keeps me going is doing this
Yeah.
every so often. Incidentally, our next scheduled program is July the 11th. It's on a Tuesday. I haven't worked on guests yet, but hopefully somebody will say yes. So keep that in mind. I also want to mention that the sound system and the sound you can hear is courtesy of Pierce Productions, audio production. Now, for me having to shout, to me having to speak in here and everybody can hear is worthwhile. What's next for you, Mike? You working every day? I thought, I got the impression that you were retired.
Yeah, I get that question too. I want to hear your explanation.